Hey readers, I'm Abby.
And I'm Jess.
And welcome to our discussion of our March book club pick. We are talking about Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens this month.
It was so good.
We absolutely loved it. Okay, I'm just going to say right now, there's going to be spoilers galore in this video. So if you are one of the 3 people that have not yet read Where the Crawdads Sing,
do not listen to this.
Do not watch this video. Just, it'll be here after you've read the book. So come back and watch.
Read it, then watch.
So anyone who's watching now, we're assuming has read it, and we're going to talk fully about all of the plot intricacies in this book because there are so many.
So many.
So Jess, do you want to give us a little synopsis about, what this book is about, so we can just jump into it from there?
Yeah, so just a little refresher. Where the Crawdads Sing follows Kaia Clark, who is also known as the Marsh Girl, and it takes place in this small coastal town in North Carolina. Kaia grew up on the marsh, or in the marsh? On the marsh, I don't know, both. And she grew up very isolated from everyone else in the town. And unfortunately, her family wasn't really stable. Her mother left when she was really young, and slowly her siblings also did the same. Her father was an abusive alcoholic, and this all shaped her as she was growing up, and her isolation became even more key to her survival.
Yeah.
So we follow Kaia as a child and as a young adult. And we kind of just see the way that her environment shapes who she becomes and the people that come into her life while she least expects it.
So then there is also a murder mystery embedded in this book. Chase Andrews was once the best quarterback the town has ever seen.
Super popular, super good looking.
Handsome ladies man.
You can picture him in your head.
Totally.
Yeah.
And he is found dead at the base of this fire tower, and the sheriff believes that there has been some foul play involved. And so, intertwined in Kaia's upbringing, we flash forward to the future in 1969 and 1970, when this investigation and trial is going on about who possibly could have murdered Chase Andrews.
Who do they suspect, Abby?
They suspect Kaia Clark, the Marsh Girl, of committing this murder.
Yeah.
Now, we know, spoiler, that Kaia and Chase had a bit of a romance for a few years.
Did. So there were 2 main guys in Kaia's life. Tate, who was in her life from a young age, although they didn't really talk when she was a child. Their relationship really developed throughout the course of the novel, but he was her first love.
Yeah, he taught her to read. They explored the marsh together. They loved the natural world, feathers and stones and birds. So they really share that in common. Yeah. And then they come apart when Tate goes off to college and really doesn't stay in touch with
And that
Kaia.
breaks Kaia's heart. And then Chase, after a while, comes into her life. He's very different than Tate. He is more abrasive. How would you describe him in relation to Tate?
I would say he's not as sensitive.
Yeah.
He's more of a bro, perhaps.
Let me show you how cool my boat is.
Yeah, he's got a speedboat. He doesn't pay attention to sort of the finer details of emotion or the world around him. He's got this like bravado, this puffed out chest, where he does whatever he wants because he's never been told otherwise.
And he doesn't really respect Kaia.
Or women.
Or women in general.
Yeah.
And he feels... He's very sketchy. I don't know. How else would you say? He just, he doesn't let Kaia come into his life outside of the marsh. He wants to keep their relationship very contained to her house in the marsh, and that's it. And when she tries to expand, their relationship and put herself out there, because she's not comfortable
being a side piece in the marsh kept
and he's like
quiet.
Yeah, exactly. And he's like, no, let's just keep it here.
Keep it on the DL.
And she's like,
I'm not going to tell anyone about that I'm dating you.
Yeah.
So there's these two central relationships in her life. And she also becomes very close. She rides around the marsh in this little skiff boat that's motor operated, and so she needs gas for the motor to continue her exploration and really her lifestyle. And so she goes to the little town wharf where there's gasoline that's sold and other grocery items, and really befriends this man named Jumpin', who runs the gas shack. And he becomes almost like a father figure to her.
Yeah, she didn't ever really have a good parental figure in her life, and Jumpin' and Mabel, his wife, really take on that role. And from a young age, she starts going to them, and they realize that something is wrong, and try to help her as best they can. They give her supplies, like clothes, and I
loved that friendship.
Yeah.
It felt very real, and
I think part of the reason why they got along so well is because Jumpin' and Mabel were also kind of outcasts because of discrimination at that time. So I think that they both were isolated, and Kaia gravitated towards them because of that.
So we won't maybe go as far as spoiling the end yet.
Maybe at the end of this video.
End of this video. We'll spoil the end of the book.
Yeah.
But that's our sort of brief winding synopsis. So now let's talk about just like our impressions of the book, what we thought going in, and what we felt about the book as it was sadly over.
Yeah, I didn't want this book to end. When I first started the book, I'll be totally candid here.
Honest.
It took me a little bit to get into this book. I was like, okay, so there's a lot of descriptions of the marsh, and I needed a little bit of time to connect with Kaia's character. But then once I did, I could not put this book down. I plowed through it, and I had the whole month to read it, and obviously I left it until like the last 2 weeks or so.
We know some of you did too.
But I couldn't put it down, and by the end of the novel, so it took me a while to get into it, but then by the end, I felt like Kaia was someone I knew. I felt like the marsh was real, and I could just picture everything in my head because Delia Owens was so descriptive in the way she talked about everything.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad it's being made into a movie.
I am too. Yeah. And I will also admit that sometimes when a book has a lot of hype behind it, I don't believe the hype. Yeah. But in this case, the hype is totally warranted.
That's true.
So I dove into this book, and it took me a little bit to get going, but I really felt for Kaia. Once my stumbling block at the beginning were sort of the accents and the accented speech. But once I started hearing the voices in my head, which sounds weird, but you guys know what I'm talking about. Yeah. It was easier to sort of get into that North Carolina marsh dialect. And I really felt for this girl. I mean, I can't imagine being 6 years old and being abandoned by my family and, you know, steering a boat alone, figuring out how to make money. She digs up mussels, sells them for money, so she's able to buy herself groceries. She's cooking her own meals. I mean, this is like all of the things that I loved about like Little House on the Prairie when I read them growing up.
Yeah.
This had those elements of survival just woven through them.
Yeah.
And I certainly did not want this book to end. I was really crying at the end on the subway, which is, I think,
best place to cry.
The mark of a great read. So, yeah, I really I wanted this book to go on and on, but I felt that it ended in sort of the perfect place, and we have resolution.
Yeah, someone made a comment and said, this book sings. And I loved that because it really does. It stays with you. And I will remember this book, I think, for forever. It's one of those that just will stick with me no matter how much time goes by.
Definitely. So one of the things I absolutely loved about this book is the descriptions of the natural world.
Oh, yeah.
So Delia Owens, this is her first foray into fiction, but she's written a lot of nonfiction, and she herself grew up near the Okefenokee Swamp. So she has a bit of, you know, she wanted to set it in a place where she herself could envision.
Yeah, she has a lot of knowledge about marshes and like coastal communities, and she herself spent a lot of her life isolated in nature. So that's, I think, where a lot of this great descriptive language is coming from. Yeah.
And there's also a thread of solitude and loneliness throughout this book. And, you know, as the character Kaia is, you know, she's grown up alone. She speaks to the seagulls. She doesn't see many people in the course of a day, if not a week. So she's used to being alone, but there's an amazing line in here that when she's waiting for the verdict, she's in jail. She's been accused of the murder of Chase Andrews. She's awaiting the verdict, and she says, there's no feeling of loneliness like the one waiting for your murder conviction verdict, which, you know, it just explores the depths of how alone and lonely we can feel.
Yeah.
I think that's so beautifully done, like a watercolor almost.
Yes. Speaking of watercolor, Kaia paints. She paints the things that she loves in nature, and throughout the book, she documents her findings. She loves like collecting like shells and feathers and all these sorts of cool things from the marsh, and she paints, and I wish I could see them.
Yeah.
I try in my head and visualize, but I would love to see like an edition of the book where they have these beautiful paintings.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, she collects all of these things. She's so observant and finds the, you know, the feather from the throat of the heron, and she can identify them, and then she paints them. And so, did you at all imagine what the shack looked like inside?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I tried.
I tried too. It's got a wood-burning stove. I imagined it sort of like lean to one
Falling
side.
apart, kind of. You don't know if it's going to collapse or...
I know. She's got her specimens across. I just pictured like every surface pinned up on walls along with her gorgeously detailed paintings.
Yeah.
And so when she befriends Tate...
Her first love that we mentioned before.
He's teaching her how to read, and she finally invites someone into her sort of inner sanctum inside the shack, and he sees her paintings and her feathers and her specimens, and he remarks saying like, this is incredible work. You should send this away to a publisher. And she indeed gets published and begins to write several books that detail, you know, the beauty and the vast sort of biological detail that are found in these marshes.
Yeah, she becomes a very successful author, published author, but without any formal education. And so, like, I think that one of the questions you could ask is how important was a formal education to Kaia? Did she need it? Did she make the right choice in not going to school?
Yeah, because she went to school for
1 day.
1 day.
1 day. This was when she was very young. The social workers came and were like, you need to go to school.
Yeah.
And so she went to school for 1 day and immediately was outcast by everyone.
Yeah.
Everyone. She was not able to find any friends, and she decided, you know what? This sucks, and this isn't for me, because no one will ever, I think she felt like no one will ever accept me. In that 1 day, she felt like her whole life would be this way.
Yeah.
And decided if I can avoid at least this part of it, then maybe that's the best thing.
And some of you, we asked this question in our Facebook group, and some of you responded. Brenda Dixon Dunlap said that you know, she thought that Kaia didn't need a formal education, that she was smarter than all of them, including eventually the jury at the end.
Yeah.
And Dina Brower says, you know, she didn't need an education to have a good life. You know, that had she stuck with school, her life would have been very different, but not necessarily better. And you and I were talking before, and I was saying that in some ways, maybe sticking with school, she would have, for better or for worse, assimilated with the village a little bit earlier. They would have had time to sort of get to know who this Marsh girl was. She would have been seen every day, and so would have been less of sort of this mysterious figure that they sort of sometimes see out in the water, or sometimes very few times in town. So in some ways that could have been a service to herself, where she just assimilates more with the townspeople. But she made the choice for herself.
And unfortunately, she had to make that choice herself. She was a child with no parental guidance, and, you know, a 6-year-old going to school being bullied for who she is, of course you're not going to want to go back. Right. I definitely had times when, you know, when I was a kid and not fitting in, and my parents were like, but you're going anyway. she didn't have that, and that was her choice, and that's the best decision she could have made at that time. And then from there, she was on her own.
Yeah. I love Rona Compton's assessment that says, like, if she had made one female friend, her life could have been totally different. And that's so interesting to speculate. You know, like, she had connections with men who were around her own age, but, you know, what if she had a female friend? That's so interesting, Rona. I like that that's where your mind went.
Yeah, and Delia Owens actually touched a little bit on that in this interview that we have here. She based a lot of her novel on things that she's observed in nature. So she's looked at a lot of groups of mammals and kind of observed what they do and why they do it. And she noticed that a lot of females tend to group together, and the males jump around from one group to another looking for females to mate with. But the females hoard together and stick together, and there's this kind of sisterhood between them. So she made that connection between animals and people. But there's also a lot of competition within these groups. So it's not all like sunshine and rainbows in the animal world or in the world of people. And she says that Kaia was denied this opportunity to band with a group of females her age, which is something that will change the way that you see the world. And so she didn't have any strong female friendships, and I think that really affected her.
I mean, we get to see the sisterhood of, like, always wears pearls and ponytail freckle face and short black hair. Those are her nicknames for her peers in her class, whom she sees, you know, sort of grouped about in the town. And these girls are cruel to her. They gossip about her. And so it's interesting, the sort of, there is some sisterhood portrayed.
But she's not a part of it.
But she's not a part of it.
And I love the way, I love those nicknames because she observes them in the same way that she observes nature.
The natural world.
She's like, this is short black hair, always wears pearls, and she watches them from afar, and that's kind of how she observes everyone that she doesn't come into contact with, and she makes mental notes as if they're, you know, birds or something she finds in nature.
And later when she goes on a date with Chase, she wants to sort of appear like the other girls, and so has remembered what they wear to a picnic on the beach, and so she sort of imitates that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So how do you think Kaia's observations of nature really shaped her vision of the world? Like, do you think our world, the human world, mimics the natural world, or do you think there's some division of the two?
I think that her observations really gave her the ability to look at things in a more detailed way than most people do, and look at things and appreciate the small things that a lot of people just overlook. I don't know if I think that nature totally mimics society. I think there are similarities, like we were talking about before, with like the female groups and things like that. But I think that that also changes based on where you are, and where she was. I think it complicated things. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the natural world has a sense of order and, you know, sort of checks and balances almost, that sometimes the human world, with our prejudice, our money, our justice system, we rearrange those facts.
Yeah.
You know, I think in the natural world, there is sort of a matrilineal respect, you know, that females, since they create young and birth them and take care of their babies, that there's sort of a respect for that. You know, often in lions, the females will be the hunters and they'll go off to provide for their families, and you know, the men will stay home with the babies. So I think, you know, our human world has been rearranged according to sort of the agendas of a few people in charge. And in the natural world, really, it's all based on survival and
power and like privilege isn't based on things that make sense.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
So Kaia, so smart. She can survive on her own. She's amazing in so many ways, but yet she's just ostracized constantly. And in the natural world, I feel like you take any other animal or any other being that's as skilled and smart as she is, and they would obviously come out on top.
Yeah.
But she doesn't.
Yeah. One of the things I loved in this book, and I really want to hear from some of you, is the presence of poetry. Yeah. We've got Tate's father, who loves poetry. He tells his son, you know, poems are important because they make you feel something.
Was that your Southern accent?
So, yeah. Minor. And then throughout, as Kaia becomes sort of a young adult, she has an appreciation for poetry. And throughout this book, you know, I would turn a page and see, oh, there's a poem coming. Yeah. And she often thinks of these poems, you know, which sort of address a situation that she's in.
I loved her introduction to poetry when she first learned that they can rhyme and be fun, and she just went around the marsh making up like poems in her head and was having fun with it, and just it was a way for her to express herself. And it just, her passion for it grew and grew, and eventually turned into her actually writing incredible poems. It was just really cool to see that transformation.
Yeah. That was, you know, just, it's so beautiful how language, once she possesses the knowledge of language and the ability to sort of shape her own thinking, it takes off, and, you know, she becomes one of the most well-respected scientists in all the marsh without a formal education, and a skilled poet without any formal education. So really, it's just so beautiful that she just grasps that and runs with it.
Yeah, I think that this book demonstrates the power of reading and language, because that changes Kaia's life.
Yeah.
When Tate starts teaching her words and the alphabet and how you put them together to make these beautiful things, her life totally changes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the marsh versus the town.
Okay.
And this North Carolina marsh, you know, Kaia lives in it or on it, as we were talking.
Who knows?
And so I wanted to talk about how the setting really shapes the novel, and also, you know, how her status as an outsider, you know, how does that change how others see her, and, you know, when she comes into the town?
So I think that the marsh is like a physical representation of her isolation. If she lived in another place in the town that was maybe more accessible, I feel like things would have been very different. But as a lot of you also said, the setting, the marsh, is a physical boundary. It really is a dividing line between her and the rest of the people. So I think that it was key in just shaping the tone of the novel, the way that Kaia's life was going to go. So yeah, Christy says, the setting for the novel makes a very physical example of the line between the accepted in society and those that are different.
Yeah.
I see a lot of the same comments that the marsh is a physical boundary, which is really what I was thinking as well. And as she grows more isolated from the people that are outside the marsh, she really clings to the marsh even more. And it becomes kind of a parent figure in her life as well.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting.
And she's such an expert in her surroundings, and you know, these townspeople that live right next to this marsh, they have no idea the multitudes that it contains, and you know, developers are eager to pave over it and develop it.
Yeah.
And they have no idea about the complex ecosystems that exist there. So in this world, she is the expert, the sort of king of the marsh. And the townspeople really have no clue.
They have no clue. And since they don't understand, people like to point at what they don't understand and be like, that's different, that's weird. And I think that's why Kaia, you know, her being in the marsh in a place that people don't understand, immediately branded her as an outsider. And then when they got to see that she was so different in the way that she saw the world, she was even more of an outsider, and then it just won't change. Once, you know, I feel like once someone is branded that way, kind of stays that way for a long time.
Yeah. So let's touch briefly on the justice system in this book. You know, Kaia was, first of all, I think the sheriff should be fired.
Oh my God.
He was terrible.
So awful.
Really bad at putting together his evidence. He arrests and jails Kaia way before he's got
no proof
that
he's got no proof
she was the murderer, and
Yeah.
they keep her in jail until the trial.
Yeah, it was unreal.
That trial, man, that was stressful.
I was like biting my nails the whole time.
Yeah.
I didn't know what the outcome would be.
No.
I thought that either it would just be she's guilty and the town once again lets her down, and it wouldn't be a surprise to me.
That was one possibility.
One possibility. And then the other one where she would finally be not guilty is like, okay, you know, redemption for the townspeople, and they're finally seeing her as more than just this marsh girl outsider. But I didn't know which way it was going to go, though. It was very up in the air for me.
Yeah, there were times when I thought that maybe she did do it.
Same.
There were times when I thought maybe Tate did it.
Tate was my number one suspect, I will say.
Because he loves her and he knows that she's been treated badly by this quarterback bro
terrible
jerk.
guy.
And I could see him exacting revenge, but he's also so sweet that I didn't know if he was capable of that.
Yeah.
And really, like, you find out who actually did it in the last 2 pages of the book. And I can't say it. I feel like we should just, if you know who did it,
glaze over that.
You know
she's
who
found
did it.
not guilty. We can say that.
Yes,
Kaia is found not guilty,
Yes.
and
you're so relieved because
yeah.
she could not spend the rest of her life in jail. That's what's killing her when she's jailed.
She can't be in the place that she loves the most, the marsh. She misses it so much.
When she's finally released, when they find her not guilty, the end of the chapter is like I felt the sea breeze on my face for the first time in months, and you're just like, yeah, she's out, she's free, thank God. So if you know who did it, let us know.
Yeah.
Like, were you surprised? I can't spoil it. I can't have it
I
out
was
there.
shocked. We won't talk about it further, but I was shocked. But in a way, I was...
Do you think justice was served?
I think justice was served. I think it was.
Yeah. So, do we have anything else? This book contains multitudes. We could go on for
literal
forever. Days talking about this book.
Yeah.
But we want to hear from you. So leave us some comments about what you thought. If you disagree with anything we said, we want to know. We want to chat about it.
It's totally fine to disagree. Just know that we're right. I'm kidding. No, seriously.
So we want to hear from you. Let us know in comments below what you thought of the book, what you think about any of these questions we just mentioned. We want to hear from you and read along with you.
And thank you for reading this with us.
I know.
Yeah, we were so happy to see that you were all so thrilled with this choice.
Yeah. And pretty soon we'll be announcing our April book club picks. So stay tuned for that as well.
Stay tuned.
Bye.
Bye.